Let me mention that this is the easiest home cake recipe that you're ever going to find on the internet. Take my word for that. This is such an easy recipe that anyone can try it out. I've shared this recipe with a few people. They've tested and approved that this is such an easy recipe, and it's also very delicious. We are going to be using just a few ingredients, and as you can see, I have some sugar, margarine, my all-purpose flour, some cocoa powder, milk, vanilla essence, a pinch of salt, baking powder, and some eggs. That's it. I'm going to be sharing with you the quantities as I explain more in the video, and I'm also going to leave the exact measurements down in the description box. You can check that out if at all you want to try this recipe. I even shared this recipe with my debug, and she said that this is such an easy recipe, and now she also enjoys her cakes at her place. Without further ado, let's get started. So first things first, we'll start off by measuring what needs to be measured and mixing what needs to be mixed. I'll start off by mixing 2.5 teaspoons of baking powder, and I'm going to be adding it to 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour. So this is how I mix my flour and my baking powder. For every 1 cup of all-purpose flour, I usually mix it with 1 teaspoon of baking powder. So once I've added my baking powder to the all-purpose flour, I'm going to mix it, then set aside, then we can proceed. Let's continue, and I'm going to be adding 1 cup of margarine. You can also substitute that with butter if at all that's what you use, and I'm going to beat it for about 5 to 7 minutes till it's pale and fluffy before I can go in with my sugar. So this is going to help it, especially in this cold season, to make it a little bit softer so that it can be able to incorporate pretty well with the sugar. It's also going to help in having a very smooth consistency once we add in our eggs and our vanilla essence. If at all it's in the hot season, you can definitely skip out on this part of beating the margarine till it's pale and fluffy. But for now, since it's very cold, the margarine is very hard, so I would highly recommend that you do not skip out on this part. Also, let me mention that you do not have to use a hand mixer if at all you do not have one. You can use any other tool that you have, say a whisk. You can also use a wooden spatula, or you can also use the silicone spatula. It also does the job. Then once I'm happy with the texture of the margarine, I'll go in with my sugar. I'm going to be adding in 1 cup of sugar, and just to mention, this is a simple hack that will help you if at all you do not have the measuring cups. 1 cup, the standard measuring cup, is equals to 250 ml of liquid. So if at all you do not have the measuring cups, you can take a yogurt container that measures 250 grams or 250 ml and use that as your measuring cup. So if at all I say 1 cup of something, make sure the container that you're using is 250 grams or 250 ml of measurement. So if at all I say half cup, take that container and add half that. If I say quarter, measure quarter of it. I'm also going to beat my sugar for about another 5 or so minutes till it's well combined and till you can't hear any grains of sugar down in the bowl. That's when you know your sugar is ready to add the next ingredient. Also, as you continue mixing your sugar and your margarine, scrape off the sides so that we can get everything that is hiding even at the bottom of the container. Once I am happy with the consistency of the sugar and the margarine, and once I can feel that there are no grains of sugar in the bottom of the bowl, I'll go in with my eggs. I'm going to be using 4 eggs, and I'm going to be adding 1 at a time. So that means you add 1 egg, beat it till it's well incorporated into the mixture, then add in the second egg, then also beat it till it's well incorporated into the mixture, add the third one, do the same, then finally go in with your 4th egg and also do the same. So this stage is going to take about 3 or so minutes thereabout. Also, adding in eggs 1 at a time as specified in the recipe helps to build volume for the cake, and it's going to ensure that your cake is very fluffy at the end. But if at all you add in all your eggs at once, you may risk getting a very dense cake, and that's not what you want. So you add in one egg at a time as you beat to incorporate more air into your mixture. And as usual, don't forget to scrape off the sides of the bowl as well as the bottom. Once I am happy with the consistency and the mixture, just how I like it, I'll go in with my flavoring. I'm going to be using vanilla essence for today's episode, but you can also use, say, lemon essence, orange essence, or any other essence that you have. But since I want this to be as simple as possible, I'm going to be using some vanilla essence. I'm going to be adding in 1 tablespoon of vanilla essence as well as a pinch of salt. So let me talk about the salt. The salt helps to balance out the sweetness. It brings out the real flavors in the cake. So if at all you're going to be making this cake, please do not skip out on the salt part. It's totally optional, but I would highly recommend. Then something else I would like to mention is that I noticed with the brand of vanilla essence that I use, once I add it to my mixture, it always curdles up. That's totally okay. I've not had any problem or effects of that. And also let me mention that most of this essence are gotten from, let's say the vanilla essence is gotten by soaking the vanilla bean in some alcohol for about a year or so. So it's totally understandable and you should not worry about that. For the flour, I'm going to be using 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour that I've already mixed with some baking powder. If at all you're going to be using the self-raising flour, you do not need any baking powder. You do not need to add any bit of baking powder. Let me emphasize on that. This is because the self-raising flour already has its own raising agents in, and you do not have to add anything else. Even if you add, it's not going to make your cake rise more. After all, you're going to be risking getting a very bitter cake because of adding in excessive raising agents. At this point, I would also recommend that you sift your flour because, as you can see, my raising agent has huge lumps of baking powder, and since we already measured our baking powder, I'm going to be pressing the lumps of baking powder through the sieve because it's part of the recipe. Then I'm going to be mixing this with 1 cup of fresh milk. Can you use a substitute like buttermilk? Of course you can use, but I wouldn't recommend. I would recommend if at all you have the fresh milk, you use the fresh milk instead. This is because we've used baking powder as our raising agent in the recipe. Baking powder is activated by liquids, say water or milk. But if at all you're going to be using something else like buttermilk, you'll need to add in some baking soda in your recipe. But I do not want to add that because I want this recipe to be as simple as possible so that everyone can get a chance and an opportunity to try this recipe because we all deserve to eat cake. So I'm going to be adding in my flour, then I add in my milk, and finally I'll go in with the remaining mixture of the flour. What I normally like to do is I start with the flour and end with the flour. This is because once you start with your milk, it will be like adding milk to margarine, and this is adding liquid to an oil. That will not mix pretty well. But if at all you start with the flour and add in the milk is going to hold onto the flour, so we are going to have a very smooth consistency. So that's the same reason I will end with the flour as well. After adding in my flour and my milk, I like to go in with a spatula first so that I do not create a cloud of flour in my kitchen. Then once that is well combined, I'll go in with my other flour. Then I'll finish this up with my machine. The machine ensures that everything is well incorporated because it's whisking at a very high speed. So everything will be well broken down, everything will be evenly distributed, and we're going to have such a delicious cake. We are almost winding up on this recipe, and if at all you haven't subscribed, this is your sign. you need to subscribe. And we can all agree that this is such an easy recipe that anyone can try out. And as I earlier mentioned, you do not need any special tools to make this particular recipe. Even if you're going to be using a mwiko, it's going to turn out great. It's also going to turn out delicious, and I'm pretty sure you're going to love the results. So at this point, I'm going to be adding in some cocoa powder because I want it to have the marble effect. So I'm going to take about 2 tablespoons of cocoa powder, but you can also add in more cocoa powder if at all you want to have a very intense cocoa flavor. Then I'm going to be mixing it with some hot water. So let me explain why I'm doing this. You know that cocoa powder is hydrophobic. That means that once you add in cold water or cold milk, it will not mix very well with your cocoa powder. We are going to have a very difficult time trying to mix the two. But if at all you're going to be using hot water, you're going to have an easy time and you'll achieve the results very fast. Within no time, your cocoa mixture will be ready. Also, if at all you do not want to do this, you can also divide the batter into 2, and the batter is a B-A-T-T-E-R, not B-U-T-T-E-R. It's a batter with an A. You're going to divide it into 2, and then for the portion that you want to add in your cocoa powder or to have the chocolate flavor, you're going to add in your cocoa powder. But then, since I mentioned that it doesn't really go well with some cold fluids, we are going to also have a very difficult time mixing that, and that can result into over mixing. Then I'm going to portion my batter. In today's episode, I just want about 1/3 of the portion to have the chocolate flavor. Then I'm going to mix it very well till everything is well combined and the color is evenly distributed. Then I'll show you how I'm going to be layering my flavors. We are now going to be adding our batter in our baking tin. I'm using this huge loaf tin that bakes the 600 grams bread, and I'm going to be lining it with a parchment paper. So if at all you do not have a parchment paper, apply a layer of margarine or cooking oil to your tin, round and round till all the parts are well coated with the margarine or cooking oil. Then add in some flour, then shake it till the flour is evenly distributed, till you can no longer see the base of the container. Make sure that your tin is well dusted. You can also use a sufuria, you can also use a baking tin, you can also use a glass tin. Lack of the baking tin shouldn't be another reason why you do not try the recipe. You can totally use anything. Just make sure that you're not going to be baking in a plastic container. But if at all you're going to be using a parchment paper, there is no need of doing that. Just spread some little margarine on the base, then put your baking paper. For me, I like putting it at the base only because for the sides you can just run a knife through and your cake is going to come out easily. Also, when you use your baking paper, be guaranteed that your cake is not going to stick. So I will highly recommend, if you bake often, just buy a baking paper. It's very cheap. And baking paper, let me explain this in Swahili, ni zile makaratasi hutumika kufunga chipo in town. I got 10 meters of that for about 230 shillings. So you can see it's very cheap, and that will take me a while. Then for the layering, you can add in whatever pattern that you want. You can add in your vanilla, chocolate, vanilla, chocolate, vanilla, chocolate, like that till the batter is over. Or you can also put chocolate one side, vanilla one side. For me, I decided to add in the first layer of vanilla flavor, but I was leaning towards one side. Then I added one layer of chocolate on the other side that the vanilla flavor hadn't spread to. Then I also added the chocolate flavor on this other side. Then in between and at the top, I added my vanilla flavor. And that's the pattern that I chose, but you can feel free to do it how you like it. And also, after adding in your flavors, if at all you want to mix the two and have a very creative pattern, you can go in with a skewer or a toothpick and swirl it around till the flavors are well mixed. But I also didn't want that. You can be creative at this point and you can do how you like it. Finally, after adding in all your batter in the baking tin, you're going to bang it on the countertop for about 5 seconds, and this is going to help in releasing the air bubbles that might have been trapped while we were layering our batter. I'm going to proceed to bake this at 150 degrees if at all you're using a very small oven for about 60 to 65 minutes. And how to know your cake is ready is once you insert a skewer or a toothpick or a fork or a knife at the centermost part, it should come out dry. If at all it comes out wet, it means that your your cake is not yet ready. If you're going to be using a big oven or an oven that has a fan, I will recommend you to bake this at 180 degrees for the same 60 to 65 minutes and your cake will be ready. Finally, our cake is ready, and I like serving mine the next day. This is to let the cake cool down and let the flavors marinate so that you can have one very tasty cake. You can also serve it immediately, or you can also let it cool down, then serve it after about an hour or so. It's also going to be delicious, but not as delicious as when you let it wait till the next day. I will highly recommend, if you bake this cake let's say at 6 p.m. or at night, serve it for breakfast. If at all you're going to bake this in the morning, serve it in the evening. The longer it marinates, the more delicious it becomes. Try this out and let me know if at all you think the same. Also, letting the cake rest for longer ensures that the crust becomes very soft. As you can notice, the crust on my cake is very soft just because I left it overnight. You can't compare this to a freshly baked cake. A freshly baked cake tends to be a little bit harder on the crust, and letting it rest will ensure that the crust becomes softer and softer. I'm also going to measure out this cake, and it always gives me about 1295 grams. This is roughly 1.25 to 1.3 kgs of cake. So if at all you want to have this recipe, you can definitely have it, and you'll get about 650 grams of cake. So somewhere in between, there's a mistake that happened. Let me explain. So once my cake was ready and I was ready to cut it, I placed my camera on the tripod, pressed record, cut the cake, and once I was done, I stopped the recording. Or so I thought, but this is what actually happened. So when I thought I started recording, I actually did not start recording. So when I ended the recording, that's when I actually started recording. So the footage that I had was of me cleaning up the surface, and that's not the footage that I wanted. That explains why you did not see me cutting the cake, because I do not have the footage of that. So I hope you bear with me and you understand. But this is the final outcome. As you can see, our layers are just how I wanted them. And let me tell you one thing, Maina. This cake was very delicious. It was very tasty. You can have this cake with whatever beverage that you may prefer. You can also have it as it is. You do not need any drink for this cake because it's very moist. It's very delicious. Remember, we added in a whole cup of milk, so it wouldn't choke even if you decided to eat it as it is. But I served mine with some cold milk, and it slapped. It slapped a good one. So I will highly recommend you to try this recipe. As you've seen, it's such an easy recipe with only a few ingredients that you definitely have in your house. That's it for today's episode. Subscribe if you haven't. We're on the road to 100,000 subscribers. We are currently at 98,000. We just hit 98,000 this morning. So don't forget to like this video. Leave your thoughts down in the comment section. Tell me how you would do it differently. Don't forget to share this with a friend. Let them have a taste of this motamu. This is such an easy recipe, and I'm not tired of emphasizing on that. There's no reason as to why you shouldn't be enjoying cake. If at all you want to know how to bake this using a gas cooker, using a stove, or using a jiko, let me know down in the comment section, and I'm also going to do a separate video on the same. And I'll see you in my next one. Bye.